This is the Agribusiness Report. I'm Tony St. James, joined today by the Honorable Henry Cuellar. He represents the 28th District of Texas, is on the House Appropriations Committee and on the Subcommittee on Ag, Rural Development, includes the FDA. That's a lot to put on a business card, isn't it?
It is. So let's just talk about USDA and FDA.
And as we talk about the appropriations there, this is not really necessarily an easy job. There's a lot of things to consider when you're talking about appropriations.
It is. Look, I sit on 3 subcommittees on appropriations: Defense Appropriations, Homeland Appropriations, and Ag. And it's good to be back in the Ag Appropriations again. I served about 8 years or so in the Ag Committee. Served under Colin Peterson, Bob Goodlatte, and of course, Mike Conaway is now retiring. He was chairman also. So I served with Goodlatte and Colin Peterson as chairman. Oversight is important because we did the farm bills, and I remember working on the first farm bill. I think it was around 2008. And I worked on an issue that a lot of folks in the Ag Committee were not familiar with. Let me test you, Tony. Fever ticks. A lot of people didn't know about fever ticks because that's an issue that was here in the early 1900s in different parts of the country. Then it went away, but in Texas, in South Texas, and it's starting, those quarantine areas are starting to grow a little bit. We're seeing that. So I've added, now working with Chairman Bishop and Jeff Thornberry, the ranking member. I've been adding monies for years, but the first time was in 2008. Had some language there to add some monies on fever ticks, and I had to explain to folks what fever ticks were all about.
And if you don't mind, when we talk about fever ticks, we're talking about something that could devastate the U.S. livestock industry. And we also have a plan in place for controlling that fever tick at the border. What are you hearing on that right now? Are we doing that effectively? Do we need to do something different?
I think we need to do something different. Let me tell you why. I've added millions of dollars in the Appropriations Committee. And the quarantine areas, if you look at the quarantine areas, the counties, they include some of my counties, but now they include other counties. That quarantine area has been growing, even though we've added more money, millions of dollars. And I guess the question is this, Tony, can you dip every cow or the cattle one at a time, or we need to look at something else? For example, what happens to wildlife, deer that might carry this? So what happens if you have wildlife that will cross the Rio Grande, and we do our part in the U.S., but maybe not on the Mexican side? How are we coordinating with the Mexican side? At one time, Cuba was looking at a vaccine to address this, but do we need to look at something different? I think we need to, because I know I've been working on this for years. I've been adding monies on it, but the quarantine area has been growing. If that hits, full force, the cattle industry, you're talking about a billions and billions of dollars industry that could be affected.
You talk about working with Mexico along the border, and maybe this is a perfect segue to talk about the Usmca. It's the NAFTA 2.0, if you will. That's across the finish line. That was a heavy haul, wasn't it?
It was. At the end of the day, this is a NAFTA 2.0. 75% of it's the same, but that 25% is important in many ways. So we got it done on July 1st. The implementation came in. Now we need to look at the implementation and make sure it's implemented right by all the 2 other countries along with the U.S., all 3 of us. And we need to look at that. And certainly I'll be looking at heading off to Mexico, and this is one of the topics that I certainly want to talk to the foreign secretary, because he was involved in the negotiations. And I have to say, for the first time, we had every single member of Congress, Democrat and Republican in Texas, that voted in favor. Usually trade agreements, you have more Republicans than Democrats voting in favor. On this one, we actually had more Democrats in Congress that voted in favor than Republicans the first time. And I think part of the reason was that it was balanced in many ways. But you had a lot of folks that were pushing. I know in Texas, whether it was the Farm Bureau or so many other groups, along with the business communities, they went and they sat down, this is before COVID-19, sat down in members' offices and talked to them about the importance of this, and we got it done. And it would have not been possible if it wasn't for the ag community.
When you talk about a USMCA and working with Mexico, it's one thing for us to talk about the U.S. side of that, but you've hit on an extremely important part of that, where Texas is a big neighbor to Mexico. How important are those relationships? Extremely
important. I used to be Texas Secretary under Rick Perry, and one of my jobs, and that's when I started putting a lot of time working with Mexico. At that time, they need to bring that back again. The border governors would sit down and see how they can work. And I remember at that time, trade was key, and it's still important. In fact, Texas is the #1 trading partner with Mexico. Every day, there's more than $1.7 billion of trade between the U.S. and Mexico. My small town of Laredo is the #1 inland port. If you look at all the trucks that pass through from El Paso down to Brownsville, they don't even match what goes through Laredo. If you look at, we're also #1 in trains also, and that just tells you the huge amount of trade that we have across. We're working on, we have in Laredo, we have I-35 that goes up. We have I-69 that we've been working on, and working with my friend Jory Arrington and other folks, we were able to add the language for a designation for I-27 that goes into West Texas, and that will open up the market not only for the energy sector, but especially for the ag sector. And that means that West Texas can start bringing things into Mexico and vice versa. So this is big. And if you look at some of the numbers, if you look at the trade in ag, it's huge. For example, over the last 25 years, the U.S. food and agricultural exports to Canada and Mexico has more than probably 3 or 4 times higher. And in 1993, that ag business was $9 billion. And 2018, it's now almost $40 billion on just the ag exports. Talk about jobs that are created exports. I mean, all you have to do is look at different parts of Texas, and the more we export, the more jobs are created on the U.S. side.
Do you mind if I ask you to look, I mean, we're talking trade, we're talking about Texas, just what you see as being very important for your district as we move ahead, whether we're talking about trade or other areas that you feel are important to that district moving ahead, starts coming to the top?
Yeah, well, let's look at first the export categories, and some of them are in my district and some of them are the surrounding areas. For example, the leading domestic exports, corn, $3.1 billion, soybeans, $1.8 billion, dairy products, $1.4 billion, pork or pork products, 1.3, and of course beef or beef products, 1.1. And some of that, of course, is in my area, and some of it is in across the state of Texas. But this is important to know, because the U.S., for example, We export over 500 million pounds of beef to Mexico. That's a lot of beef. Or let's look at corn, for example. The tortillas that Mexico is known for, Mexico imports corn, or we export corn to them, corn for the tortillas, and that's something that a lot of people don't know. We have this relationship with Mexico that's so key, Canada and Mexico. And I've always said this, this trade-in is important because Mexico has faced some of the problems with the drug cartels and security issues, but don't we want to make sure we strengthen this commerce, and especially in the ag areas with Mexico? Don't we want to have a strong, prosperous neighbor? Because after all, they have a border with us in the amount of 1,954 miles. And certainly I want to have a neighbor that's strong. So we help each other. We export and we import ag products from Mexico. And Texas is the leading area without a doubt.
We've run out of time. It's such a pleasure to visit with you and to look what's down the road here. Will you come back and visit with us down the road?
Tony, I'll be happy to do it. The ag industry is so important, and whether it's in West Texas or South Texas or another part, the Panhandle, it's important. And let me tell you one thing, when it comes to ag, we stay together, and I'm talking about the Texas delegation. We're not Democrats or Republicans, we're Texans. I should say Americans, but we're Texans first. And this is key because, let me just finish with this thought. We just passed the continuing resolution, and in there was this money for the commodity, as you know, and that was very important. I was talking to folks, the cotton folks from West Texas, some of them, and I was talking to the Farm Bureau, and this is important, and we were able to put something together, and the House side did it. We're waiting for the Senate. We're hoping that the Senate will get this done, and we want to have a government shutdown. Being on appropriations, I don't want to see government shutdowns. But the ag area, we worked together to make sure there was a provision added in the CR, the continuing resolution.
And I know ag is very appreciative of that. Thank you for your time and for your service as well.
Thank you, Tony.
Again, it's the Honorable Henry Cuellar, representing the 28th Congressional District of Texas, on today's Agribusiness Report.